Valeria, a mathematics student, has discovered a strong interest in the philosophy of science, which might influence the professional choices she will soon have to make. In her free time, she delved deeper into the subject and read Kuhn's famous book on the structure of scientific revolutions. She has filled pages with notes, reflections, and research ideas, and believes she has learned a great deal. However, she would like to understand whether what she has learned is solid, identify any possible gaps, and define strategies to strengthen the skills she has acquired. She realizes, however, that she needs a method to assess her progress, organize her thoughts, and, if necessary, revise the study methods she has been using. What Valeria is really asking herself is how to approach a metacognitive task, that is, a task of reflection. A reflection on how her thinking and learning processes have worked throughout the course of her studies. It's not an easy thing to do, but I assure you it's worth it. To learn to better understand how you learn and how to improve this skill with future goals in mind. Do you remember the power of learning we started with? Metacognition, a term introduced in the 1970s by psychologist John Flavel, refers to the ability to reflect on one's own thinking and learning processes. This skill allows you to plan, monitor, and evaluate your cognitive strategies, significantly improving learning effectiveness, and it is closely related to the concept of growth mindset. What is it about? The growth mindset theory, developed by Carol Dweck in 2006, highlights that people who believe they can develop and improve their abilities through effort, perseverance, and continuous learning, and who therefore have a growth mindset, are more likely to achieve their goals and turn obstacles into opportunities for growth. On the contrary, those who adopt a fixed mindset, a belief that abilities are innate and unchangeable, and who underestimate the role of learning, tend to avoid challenges for fear of failure and struggle to see mistakes as opportunities to learn. The growth mindset fosters motivation, resilience, and the willingness to step out of one's comfort zone, while the fixed mindset can seriously hinder personal development. And trust in one's own potential. From this perspective, dedicating work time to metacognition, that is, consciously reflecting on one's own cognitive processes and study strategies, becomes crucial to better understand how each of us learns. And to put ourselves in a position to fully develop our learning potential by cultivating our growth mindset, we can grow and improve through learning. Metacognition is made up of two main components. Metacognitive knowledge, which refers to what a person knows about their own cognitive abilities and the strategies needed to tackle different tasks. For example, knowing that you learn better by listening or by reading content. This is a form of metacognitive awareness. And then we have metacognitive regulation, which is the ability to plan a task, monitor its execution, and adjust strategies along the way to achieve a goal. For example, the ability to realize during a study session that a strategy isn't working and to be able to change it in order to get better results. Metacognition is a fundamental skill for autonomous learning because it allows us to understand how we have learned something and why a method is effective or not. The first step we can suggest to Valeria is to revisit her initial goals, the ones she had defined for her journey, and to start a dialogue with her LLM to get help in verifying whether they have been achieved. At the beginning of my journey, my goal was to be able to present the fundamental theories of the Kuhn's book, the structure of scientific revolutions, and comparing to other views, Popper. Can you start by asking me 10 questions, one after the other, and at the end, give me feedback on whether I've achieved it or not? The goal? Valeria answers the LLM's questions accurately, and the LLM gives her very interesting feedback. Here is the final feedback. Accuracy of the answers. You presented Kuhn's fundamental concepts in a clear and concise way. Clarity and completeness. Overall, your answers are concise and provide a good overview. However, you could have slightly expanded on some points, for example, the role of anomalies, question 3, and Popperian criticisms, question 8. Achievement of the goal. The goal you had set for yourself was to be able to present the fundamental theories from Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and to compare them with Popper's views. From the answers you provided, it is clear that you have achieved this goal. You have a solid grasp of Kuhn's key concepts. You can describe what is meant by paradigm, normal science, and scientific revolution, and you are able to compare them, albeit concisely, with Popper's epistemology. Valeria received overall positive feedback, which nonetheless highlights that some concepts might need to be revisited. Of course, she could go back over the content that has been identified as weak. Or she could further challenge herself in other ways by asking different types of questions or consulting another LLM. Once the picture of the skills acquired and any gaps to be filled is complete, the metacognitive work can continue with another fundamental step toward conscious learning. This involves analyzing one's own study method, evaluating how time was managed, whether a proper balance between sources was chosen, and which learning strategies proved to be most effective. From a metacognitive perspective, becoming aware of how one has learned, not just what has been learned, allows for continuous improvement of one's approach. Some reflection models, such as Kolb's experiential learning cycle or Schoen's concept of reflection on action, highlight the importance of pausing periodically to assess whether the chosen materials were appropriate, whether the level of difficulty was well calibrated, and whether it would have been helpful to integrate more interactive methods. This retrospective analysis reinforces self-regulation because it allows you to identify mistakes and successes, making targeted adjustments that optimize results in subsequent study phases. To help you carry out this reflection, it's very useful to suggest to your LLM the specific aspects you want it to help you reflect on. Valeria asks her LLM, "Can you please help me reflect on the study method I've adopted? I'd like you to ask me one question at a time, covering these aspects: selection and organization of content, tools and techniques used, consolidation, feedback and problem solving, application, practice and reflection, planning and time management, collaboration and discussion." Depending on how much you want to challenge yourself, you can engage in a dialogue with open-ended questions or ask your LLM closed questions. In any case, it's very important to ask for feedback and possible suggestions for improvement, which you can then critically reflect on. Always remember, however, that an LLM is a tool that can help you build a reflection or an opinion. But it's not a kind of truth machine you should trust blindly. One final point for your metacognitive reflection concerns the strategies you use to keep your motivation high. Motivation is a key factor in the quality of learning. In Valeria's case, there is no extrinsic motivation, that is, motivation driven by external rewards. Everything is based on her intrinsic motivation, meaning the drive that comes from interest and the enjoyment of learning itself. Even with topics we're most passionate about, however, we can sometimes feel bored, unmotivated, or distracted. And so it can be very helpful to gain clarity on which motivation strategies work best for us. You could, for example, ask the LLM for help by saying, "Can you help me reflect on which strategies I've used to get through moments when I felt like giving up?" Ask me some semi-structured questions. The LLM responds by asking these questions. Do you remember a specific moment when you thought about giving up? What was the situation? What obstacle in particular made you feel that way? Can you briefly describe the context and your feelings? What motivations helped you keep going? Did you draw on personal goals, specific interests, or external deadlines, and so on, planning future improvements? This is ultimately the natural conclusion of an effective metacognitive process. Reflecting on our strengths and weaknesses allows us to set realistic and targeted goals, useful for filling any gaps and strengthening the skills we've already developed. The use of an LLM can be a valuable support in this process, as it can help you reflect or structure the elements for future improvement. However, the central role always remains yours, and it is your conscious reflection that guides your improvement. The LLM is just an additional aid to accompany you on this ongoing journey of growth.